So there's like three parts of our personality. So there's the intellectual, there's the spiritual, and there's the physical. And a lot of people will either focus on like the physical, I'm going to become healthy and fit and strong. And then they become obsessed with that part of their lives. Or there are people who are so focused on spiritual that they're not making a lot of money because all their emphasis is on just connecting on a spiritual level. And then there's people who are, like I said, with PhDs, or people stuck in the conscious mind or just in the intellectual mind and not integrating the other parts. So the holistic viewpoint really is to combine the spiritual, the intellectual, and the physical. And that there are three ways that we really feed ourselves. And one is through our thoughts and our thinking. The other one is through our environment and who we're hanging out with and what we breathe. And the other one is what we eat, the foods we put into our body. And so all that is going to create what shows up in our physical state, emotional state, and our mental state. And understand that they have to work together.
This week's guest, Barbara Daoust, has lived a transformational life. From acting, directing, and storytelling, she's now an internationally respected author, speaker, success coach, Business Growth Accelerator. Essentially, she is a domain expert, a storyteller, and a difference maker for people's lives. For me, Barbara really understands how our minds are coded and how to unlock the change that people really desire and to unleash the creative potential and imagination to change their personal realities. As Barbara says, she helps people get out of their own way, break up with procrastination, and say goodbye to perfectionism, and to stop postponing the life of their dreams. Now, over to Barbara. Today, my guest is Barbara Daoust. So I'm really excited to sit down with you, Barbara. So welcome to the Impossible Network.
Well, thank you for having me, Mark. It's a pleasure.
Excellent. Well, I know we're going to get in your talk about specifics of what you do and why you do it and how you do it. But before we get into that, I really want to get into more about you as a person and who you are, who you think you are as a human being, your unique characteristics, your values, your principles, your worldview, and also who made you, or what made you. So perhaps you could maybe just enlighten us into those two big questions.
Sure. Thank you for asking. Not too many people who ask, Mark, so I've been thinking about I would share. And I would say, growing up in Canada had a lot of influence over who I am, as well as I was born to a French Canadian father and an English mother who was born in Newfoundland. And there could not have been a stranger combo. And they were married 9 months after meeting one another. My father spoke French. My mother spoke English. They did not speak each other's language at all.
It's a good start.
It's a very interesting start, isn't it?
I could actually say that about I married an English woman and we didn't speak the same language.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is, very literally, they did not speak each other's language. And at the time that I was growing up in Montreal, it was more, there, there were higher percentages of English speaking people than French. But my father was one of 14 children and my mother was one of 6 children. I would say that really riding the fence between French and English because I wasn't raised with an awareness of racism. I was raised with more of an awareness of the French against the English against the French. My mother's parents did not accept my father, him being French. And it was difficult for my mother to be with my father's parents because they didn't speak a word of English. So I was more aware of defending both sides. So if I was with French people and they complained about the English, I stood up for the English. And when I was, on the English side and they complained about the French, I stood up for the French. And I think I just had always a natural desire and, pull to defend the underdog. I was also, my father was a superintendent at one of the largest psychiatric institutions in Canada. And we eventually moved to the grounds of this institution. So my entire family worked at this psychiatric institution, and it was like 11 pavilions large. It was a city onto its own. So whenever anybody attacked people with mental health issues or limitations, disabilities, I had a really strong desire, just a strong connection to defending, the underdog.
Was that something you think was just natural to you, or was it nurtured by your parents?
No, I think it was just more natural to me because I loved my father. I loved my mother. So if anybody had anything negative to say about either side, I was going to come from a place of love. And even when I worked at the hospital, it's always another perspective. So I could always, I think it was very natural for me to have a perspective that was two sides of the coin. So I was always jumping into the other perspective. I mean, my partner now, we've been together for quite some time. Even if he complains about something, I'm always throwing in the other side, the other perspective, which can be frustrating, for people who want to be heard or for people who want to vent or for people who want to complain. But I don't nourish just one side of the coin.
I mean, that being a sort of an empath, to be able to see both sides, to stand back, is a rare quality. To be a naturally developed rare quality. What about your siblings? Did they exhibit this characteristic, or was it just unique to you?
Well, I think that I have one sister and we're night and day, very, very different. But I would say more than anything out of all of my relatives, I was the oddball. I was the black sheep of the family because I was never a follower and I didn't obey the rules, so to speak. And I was always doing things that people considered out of the norm, unusual, uh, crazy. I was actually known as stupid Barbara.
When you said people called you that, who?
Yeah,
Within the family?
within the family, mostly the family and cousins and aunts and uncles. And I was just really odd to them and different in ways and it was endearing. It was because I would do things that most people wouldn't do. And I left the country and moved 3,000 miles away from home, which was very out of the norm and unusual. Most people in my family kind of were in lockdown in the same place for 20, 30 years of their lives. So I was the adventurous one and I was the one who was an artist and nobody else in the family was an artist. So that was confusing for people.
How did that? I mean, you haven't said which age or what age these people started to recognize your difference. But when you're called out for being different, often in these early years of development, it can have a negative impact on someone's self-perception. How did that, let's say, the not stigmatizing, but the giving you some sort of characterization of being slightly different, how did that make you feel?
Well, I think because I was very stubborn, that it gave me more fuel.
Hmm.
Nobody was going to stop me.
Okay, so it had an empowering effect.
It had an empowering effect. I think that I had a lot of self-confidence and determination and will. Something was driving me. I didn't know why I wanted it. Had no idea why I wanted to be in the arts or to express myself the way that I did. I think that over the years, I've come to understand differently that I was a ball of energy and that energy needed to be placed somewhere. And so if I wasn't singing from the rooftops and drawing big murals on my bedroom walls, and I remember my father building a sandbox for me and he dug it like 6 feet deep and I would bury myself up to my head and also I would last for 5 hours in a sandbox building cities and, City Hall and all these buildings and just kind of navigate little cars through the cities. And I just was always occupying myself. I was climbing trees. I was, I was swimming and I was very athletic. So my father's influence was a lot of sports. And my father's influence was he wanted a boy. He didn't get his boys, but he sure did treat us like his boys. So I was the goaltender to his hockey slap shots in the laneway during the winter nights, and built a very strong resilience. And whereas my mother was more, she couldn't even throw a ball, to save her life. And she was the one who dressed my sister and I maybe 3 times a day in new outfits because we were her little dolls. So I had like this odd mixture of, fashion and femininity as well as masculinity and, determination. It wasn't even that I was feeling competitive as much as I think part of the athletic background was more about do your best, be your best, go for the best, make that slap shot.
So I feel you have answered who you are in terms of this empath individual with unique characteristics, a vigorous, vibrant imagination, endless energy, and that the impact of what made you you sounds to be that it was partly parentally driven, but also something just innate in you. This desire to be seen, to be heard, have impact. I mean, you've talked in previous interviews and books you've written about the need for recognition. Is that something that emerged before you left home to go 3,000 miles away or 2,000 miles away? Or was it something that you were always seeking some form of recognition, positive reinforcement from your parents?
I think I got recognition, but I I don't think I was understood. So there's a difference there. I felt very loved, felt recognized, but I don't think I felt understood. So it was more about seeking approval. And as you may have heard me talk about, I was 5 years old screaming on my bed, I want to be an actress. If I can't be an actress, I want a puppy. And, have a deep love and compassion for animals as well. But over the years, I never understood really why I wanted to act or sing and dance and express. I just know that I had all this energy and I had this drive because there was nobody around me who could say, let's put you in dance classes. We didn't have the money for it. Let's put you in acting classes. There weren't any acting classes. So there were after school in my elementary school, there was a teacher who did school plays. So I was in like every school play. And again, it wasn't even a desire for recognition or fame or to be seen as much as I just wanted to express. And I remember writing a contract when I was 12 years old that I had my parents sign. And I wrote a contract that they would send me to acting school by the time I was 13. And on my 13th birthday, I said to them, so, am I going to acting school? No, they didn't have the money, but they didn't say that. They just said, we never saw a contract. We never signed a contract. What are
Plausible
you talking?
deniability.
It was all, what are you talking about? And then when I was in high school, the one drama teacher that we had, I majored, they didn't even have a major in drama. I majored in music vocal just so that I could get to the high school. And the drama teacher had left. And then there was no drama teacher. So I was knocking at the principal's door saying, get a drama teacher, and then he got an after school teacher. And then that teacher, unfortunately, was being sought after by the police and he disappeared. And then and I went to my math teacher and said, "Can you direct me in Death of a Salesman? I want to play Linda Lohman. Can you," and then that fell apart. And every time I tried and tried and tried, I directed, and choreographed the variety show. I formed the drama club. Plus I was on every sports team there was. And plus I was on the dance committee. Plus I was on students council. Plus. I was just this again energy, this ball of energy. Then I decided I would direct the school play because nobody else was doing it. So I was the one who did it. And I mean, I even remember going and choreographing the can and going to, downtown Montreal and meeting with this Russian lady who scared the pants off of me to get these authentic can outfits. I mean, there was like nothing stopping me until it kind of stopped. And that's where I never understood. I understood as I became an acting instructor that it was really more about the addiction to feeling. That when you get up and you're being able to express emotion and it's unfiltered, and you can express hate and you can express ecstasy and you can express joy and you can move your body and you can feel alive and you can feel tingling throughout your entire core, that becomes adrenaline that's very addictive. It's the feeling of being alive rather than feeling being suppressed. And so I was constantly fighting for that feeling. And it's what I also could identify in a lot. It's not just like a lot of people would say that actors want to be loved and seek approval and need to be valued. Yeah, that's a basic need for all of us, which is what pulls us up to our greatness, right? What pulls us up to our genius, what pulls us up to what we, are here to do, whatever it is. But I really think that, there are natural storytellers. There are people who, are, like you said, empathic and need to feel and also want to share. I think it's really whatever floats your boat, whatever makes you feel alive. Whereas we're so trained in our educational system to be followers. We're not trained to be individuals.
I want to go back to something you said when I asked you about was it that desire for recognition. You said you felt loved, you felt appreciated, but you didn't feel understood. Going back to at that point where you're jumping up in your bed, I want to be Shirley Temple. At a young age, seeking that approval, that innate desire for some form of creative outlet and to direct that energy. When you found that outlet in the school play, in the direction, and all this endless amount of energy that you had, was that feeling that's still not being understood there, that persist? I'm going to add in here. Do you think there was an element of you just didn't understand yourself as well?
Well, yes, looking back on it now, but I don't think I felt that at the time. You know, I don't think that I felt like I didn't understand myself. I didn't even really think about that I didn't understand why I wanted this. I just did it. Think about Edmund Hillary climbing Mount Everest. And, a lot of people will say, let's connect to your why, and when you have your why, that will drive you. But there are some people who just have a want. And for example, Edmund Hillary wanted to reach the top of Mount Everest, but he didn't exactly know his why. He just knew he wanted it. That want, that desire, because as soon as you get into the why, I think the why is important, to help clarify people, but in the direction of their dreams, let's say. But sometimes the why gets you into an intellectual mode of this is why I have to do it.
Hmm. Hmm. So you had that want then to do that, and as I've learned a little bit about your life and the way you describe your decisions and your actions, that you that mission, it took you to California. Your mission reached fruition, let's say. You gained recognition that many people would see as recognition. Winning directing awards, scholarships. That tireless work paid off, and you achieved what many people would see great success and recognition. You've directed plays, you've acted, you run a theater group in San Francisco, you've qualified to teach. In most people's lives, that would be a very satisfied life of achievement and of recognition. But this quest that you described for recognition, and that what you've also said, for perfection, wasn't really you. And you've described yourself as a recovering perfectionist. So I'd love you to explain to us, what was it, that moment of realization, that sense of awakening that maybe that wasn't you and you weren't on the right path, and that want was maybe misdirected, if it's fair to say that.
One of my biggest values is to help others. And so I was always, always the person helping others, helping others, helping others, helping others,
Standing up for the underdog.
standing up for the underdog,
Hmm.
and also helping a lot more people have even greater success than me. really.
Even when you were directing and
Yeah.
acting and doing all this, that was the underlying pattern.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely. And I think that when it got to, I was teaching 25 drama classes a week, plus I was running a theater company, plus I was touring and acting in a Shakespeare company, plus I was producing and directing for other theater companies. I mean, it's really a definition of insanity, Mark. I remember in 1 week, I opened up 3 shows. So my average was, sleeping 4 hours a night. And part of it was also just trying to sustain, trying to make money, trying to survive. And that, so in order to survive, I had to add up all the little dollars to be able to create, food and then pay the bills. So that became more until I collapsed, and it was just exhaustion. And when I reached that state of exhaustion, that's when I realized that something had to change. So I decided it was really about, at that point, by the time I reached 30, making money, because I had never had any focus on money. I had never had any desire for money. I was counter culture. I was counter capitalism. In order to survive as an artist, I had to be a struggling artist. It was the only way that I could defend buying clothes at thrift stores so that I could say, I'm an artist. And it was a way to, I was like one of a handful of people out of my theater program, in undergrad that continued to survive as an artist. So there was kind of like a stamp of pride, that I was a struggling artist. It was the only way to defend continuing being an artist until I realized there's something wrong with this picture. And that because I had no emphasis on money, there was repulsion of money. And then I decided I'd go to UCLA for my master's so that I could get a master's and teach at a university level. And then that way have some stability because I never felt that comfortable stability, which is not a bad thing given that it kept driving me. But at the same time, I wanted life to be easier and to let go of the perfectionism. I could see that my work was boring me because my work was just tidy and I obsessed. It was almost like OCD, that the poor actors that I worked with. I mean, they loved working with me as much as I loved working with them, but I kept pulling out of them the best, and it's gotta be better. It's gotta be better. It's gotta be better, and it's gotta be better. And right down to where am I gonna move that lamp on stage? It's gotta be right here within an inch of its life. And it's like that's called control. And the controlling was not allowing me to expand. And I had some kind of like unconscious competent awareness around this. And I made the decision when I went to UCLA that I would really focus on failing, really allowing myself to make mistakes, creating like a safe environment where I would take risks.
Can I stop you there? I,
Yeah.
well, you talked about the money. You said that your family, you came from, they didn't have much money. You talk about future memories and past memories. Do you think you were living that life because it was scripted? You thought it was scripted in you from the family. That it was just part of who you were, that you were another part of the extended family not having money, and you just settled for that?
I think it was part of the programming,
Hmm.
absolutely, conditions and the circumstances and not having awareness around how to change or how to, put emphasis on it. I mean, it was important to my family to get a 9 to 5 job, get a pension. And it's not that they didn't have a desire for money, but it wasn't about let's grow our wealth, but yes, it was definitely part of the conditioning.
And when you sort of recognized that you were this perfectionist and it was about control, and yet you made the decision to go out and get a master's to try and change, to flip the script, let's say.
Yeah.
Um, where did this, and I've heard you talk about this before as well, this unconscious competence. What do you actually mean by that?
So unconscious competence is that I wasn't really aware of what was doing or how I was doing it in order to now I understand that highly successful people seek failure. It's really a way of making mistakes, and you make the mistake and you'll learn by the mistake. I had more of the conditioning that if I made a mistake, it wasn't good. If I made a mistake, it
Uh,
was
which is the whole perfection thing
that's
of,
right.
so in a way that perfection is almost your your subconscious way of trying to avoid failure.
That's right. That's exactly right. And so it was like if I made a mistake, it was painful. If I got feedback that wasn't approving, then it was painful. And I couldn't grow to the extent that I now know that people can grow. You're holding on to a version of safety, of comfortability, of familiarity.
So that's fascinating. Do you think, from the people you've worked with and what you've observed and where you are now, is it fair to say that there's a simple binary approach to success, which is successful people embrace failure faster and don't fear failure?
That's right.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so a lot of people that I work with, Mark, I encourage them to get outside the comfort zone, do something scary every single day. Because what we're teaching the subconscious mind is holding on to the comfort zone, right? Because it doesn't like humiliation, it doesn't like embarrassment, it doesn't like feeling inadequate. And then our ego mind, which is based on survival, it's the fight, flight, freeze response, they're holding on to what it already knows because the unknown represents the potential for death, the potential that will die, right? So I say to people every day, do something scary to get outside your comfort zone so that you teach your subconscious mind you're not going to die. So we've transposed from caveman days, our jungles of lions and tigers and bears, right onto our cities. And so we're always looking for threat. The brain is 85% hardwired for negativity because it's constantly seeking, threat. And if we're threatened in any way, we're going to go back into our cave. We're going to hide. Right. And so risk taking is really what a lot of highly successful people do.
But surely that must concern you, are the state of our universities and this culture of safe spaces that we're seeing. Um, Emerging now, even in corporations and work, where people seek safety, psychological safety. That must be, does that not concern you?
Well, I think that there's a distinction here, because there's safety. Let's say that you're part of a tribe and you want to feel safe within that tribe, which basically means that people are holding space for you, for who you are. And so there needs to be a certain amount of safety. It's kind of like with a therapist, you want to feel safe. In your environments, you want to feel a certain kind of acceptance, cultural diversity, anything where it's not about being pitted against one another. So I definitely approve of, recognizing an acceptance of others, and creating a safe space for that. Where I think there are issues, whether it's schools or corporations, is people holding on, to dogma, people holding on to rules, people holding on like there's not enough think tanks or the creative departments in most, businesses are small. And we really need innovators. We really need daydreamers. Really need people who are constantly putting out ideas that are heard. Doesn't mean that they have to be accepted, but at least a space where the ideas are heard. You want to be able to throw out something and somebody go, let's think of something else. But you don't want, I wouldn't encourage that, people are led through a leader who has to have his ideas, demonstrated in the workplace. I really think that team building and encouraging the untapped potential in each every individual. And part of the problem and the difference in the training that I do with people, part of the problem with training and billions of dollars are spent on training in corporations and businesses, but they're not focused on the individual's paradigms. So there are no two people that are alike, Mark, and no two people have the same paradigms. You could have the same parents, you could be twins, but it doesn't mean that you don't have the same friends, doesn't mean you have the same experiences. It doesn't mean you have the same emotional responses to anything that you've experienced in your life. And so everybody is being measured against, let's say, the successful person. Well, this person made it to the top because they did this, 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 and this. They picked the phone and they made their 30 phone calls a day. They did their cold calls, whatever, and then we're being taught, people are being trained to compare themselves to the highly successful individual in the corporation. And if you look anywhere, it's usually 5% that are succeeding because they're not dealing with the individual's paradigm. And that paradigm is that individual's limiting beliefs, their programming, their conditioned environment, their circumstances. And they're not even aware that they're being held back by this programming on the subconscious level. So it's to bring it up to the conscious level because the conscious mind is really the purpose of the conscious mind is to focus and choose. And everything else, 95% of our behavior, and neuroscience is showing this more often, that 95% of our behavior is controlled by the subconscious mind. All the programming, the limiting beliefs, ancestral, generational programming. And that's why first generation, second generation, third generation welfare becomes fourth generation welfare.
And it is fascinating when you talk about that because you just have to go onto any social media platform or any sort of site where you'll find so-called influencers and experts guiding you with a 5-step plan to do this or 7 steps to this success. And when you start to peel back all this advice, the way you describe people as being individuals, and you're setting yourself up for failure, but not the failure you need to be seeking, the way you describe it, that it's identifying the inner self, the inner you, your true desires, your true dreams, your true set of beliefs are essential foundations to allowing you to take the actions that you need to take to lead to the change that you need to take to implement in your life to achieve the success you desire and go through the failures that are natural to you and unique to you. So now that I understand a bit more about this seeking failure, and we'll get into more about the way that you guide your clients and help them identify and unlock their imagination. I want you just to talk us through, if you're comfortable with this, the real pivot for you that set you on a completely different journey and down the path that you're on now. And I believe that it was a result of a deeply tragic event in your life where your husband died of lung cancer just around the time of your 25th wedding anniversary, and then a number of other associated tragedies. Looking back at that now and doing what you do now, I mean, obviously the tragedy would spiral anyone out of control in their lives. But what was it that allowed you to reach those depths of the despair you were clearly experiencing, but then have the realization and the recognition that there was another path for you? And rather than just go back and default to the old path, because that's often what people would have done.
Well, I realized that, I really became curious about why change was so complicated. And I had led my life as a so-called good person, happy person. I never had depression in my life. I was always helping people. I always felt strong, but I wasn't really aware that my strength came from seeking approval outside of myself and that I was important if my students were doing well. I call that a false sense of power. So I realized that when I wasn't working with people who were doing well and I was just left with myself, I didn't feel as powerful, so that there was a mask there. There was a mask of, I've got it all figured out until I didn't have it figured out. It just all collapsed and fell apart. And, you know, losing the love of my life 2 months before my 25th wedding anniversary. And he was diagnosed May 5th and gone 3 weeks later. So it wasn't like there was time to process or it was so sudden. And what I witnessed in, my loved one at that time was so unbearable that I kind of had a psychotic break. And in that psychosis, I realized, wow, you know, there's so much more to human psychology and beingness than I ever was aware of. And I always thought I was very aware because I was very intuitive and empathic, as you said, and I was very insightful. I think my biggest talents really are those of perception, intuition, and insight. And the one my biggest wow factor is to give feedback. I can't shut up. You know, I just if I see something in you, I have to speak it. I have to give feedback. And it's just because my antennae are picking up, things that you can't see in you. So that I think one of my biggest talents. But I could also see that using that most of my life pushed me away from understanding highest level of change, of going through change and understanding that change is a painful process, which is why most people don't change. And how do you work with pain? I had no choice but to be in pain. And as you said, I found my mother in law dead in her apartment a year after my husband's passing. My father died in front of me. My best friend died in front of me. And then my 40-year-old brother died jumping out of a plane and his parachute didn't open. And he was the instructor. And the young man diving with him also died. And then my cat died. And I was just, you know, holding on to anything that was familiar, trying to hold on to anything that was familiar until I realized I had to let go, and ironically, or not so ironically, the last creative project that I did in the entertainment industry, I wrote a short film about a friend of mine passing of AIDS, and the movie was called Letting Go.
Ironic.
Ironic. And then 3 months later, my husband was gone.
Because you talked about the need to control people in the work that you did and having that power. And maybe, maybe this was, as you say, you'd come to the recognition that you needed to change the path and you were going to do the directing and the teaching. Who knows how the universe works? You probably do better than I do. But looking back on it, do you get a sense it was almost like a coalescing of incidents where it was the universe saying to you, you can control everything, you can try and control everything, you can't control death. And this multitude of deaths that occurred in your life was like a wake-up call, a recognition that it was time to move away from power and control, to change to a different direction and focus your energies elsewhere.
It was quite like that. I think that, like, when I say about controlling other people, I was more about pulling out the best in people, and it wasn't necessarily my version of what I thought was the best. It was what I saw in them as the best. So, like, I would work with every individual as the individual. So as a director, I was much more engaged in the energy of the
Ah,
individual
I
and I
see. Right.
directed them. I
Okay.
would kind of go inside people and pull out performance. My biggest desire was always to help other people more than, this idea of control. I think that
Okay. I see. I get it now. So that's what I was struggling with to try and understand because, okay, so let me see if I get this right. So you were essentially through your creative outlet, through directing and writing, seeing the abilities in people and bringing out the best performance and doing it through the lens of um, plays, film, stage, whatever. And the reality is that for what you've done is, and always looking to support the underdog, essentially all you've done is you've flipped and taken that ability to see potential in people and to get the best out of them and are doing it through a different lens now, which is your
yes,
coaching.
yeah,
Is that fair?
yeah.
Okay, right. Okay, now I see the sort of the red thread between it all. Okay, so so when did that hit you? That way that, like I said, when you've gone through this depth of tragedy, what stopped you going back to that same path, going back to teaching, going back to directing, going back to writing, and then to focus more on helping people?
Well, I had an acting academy, and plus, I had been the personal acting coach of the Olsen twins for 10 years. And it was interesting in that contract, they were going off to university. And so that was ending. That relationship was ending. And then I had my acting academy where a lot of my young babies are doing very well in the business. But uh, I realized that I was in my grief, I was a dark entity. I had always been known as positive and helping and strong. And I was just really in a dark night. And I was so depressed, and I had never experienced depression, as I mentioned, that I didn't even open up the curtains to my living room for over a year. And I was really on a journey of meeting everybody on the other side. This was my biggest desire. So, communicating, because the frustration is that when people cross to the other side, then all the physical senses are not available, right? So you can't speak and hear and touch and feel and taste and that's what I think we're here in our bodies to do. And when that was gone, with all my loved ones, I thought, well, I want to just go meet them. So I really spent a few years in what was called a passive suicidal state. And I believe to this day that I had the opportunity to have those feelings and to go through that so that I have a better understanding of people who feel that when I work with them, or anybody who has depression, I now understand it, or anybody who has loss, I now understand it. But the entertainment business was not a place that was going to soothe my grief. And so I was very protective of myself and pulled myself out because I was experiencing I have a chapter in my book that says what not to say to a grieving widow. A lot of my friends at the time saying to me, what people understand, Mark, is that grief alone is, such a overwhelming physical state, emotional state, mental state. And then you're also dealing with everybody else's comments and their viewpoints and what they have to say to you. You're trying to interpret, life and then people's perceptions at the same time. And because I was somebody who was just always taking care of other people's feelings, it was really a lesson for me to learn how to take care of my own feelings, and that was something I needed to learn as well. And that I help now with a lot of my clients, that we're not responsible for other people's feelings and nobody can make us feel anything. We're always at choice. And the biggest power that we have is to choose. But you must have awareness that that is a power you have, And so, but when you're stuck in your programming and your go to, or this is the way it has to be, or this is the way I was taught it's to be, I would say my cage was rattled and I had to break up with almost every paradigm I had ever grown up with, and but it with the and again, it's not that paradigms are bad. I don't want to make that, a disclaimer as much as there are good paradigms and there are not so good paradigms. So I show people how to hold on to what's working for you, but let go of what isn't working for you because we'll continually defend our limitations in order to protect that safety zone, right? To be comfortable and safe, even if we're miserable. I say the ego mind would rather be right than happy. So there are a lot of miserable people out there trying to prove their viewpoint and it isn't working with them. So I often imagine myself as an 86-year-old, working with somebody who's defending their limitations and not getting the results they want. And my saying to them, yeah, how's that working for you? You know?
When you talked about that period of depression and despair, that you'd said that you lost the love of your life only to discover you didn't know how to love yourself. But why is it important to love yourself? I mean, of course, everyone goes, yeah, of course you should love
Yeah.
yourself. But could you maybe just explain that in a bit more detail and why it's foundational?
Well, it goes back to that perfectionist piece as well. I realized that, my late husband and I were joined at the hip. We had been together since we were like 19. So a lot of where if I didn't feel understood in my life, he was the one who understood. So a lot of my value came from his acceptance of me. And then when I didn't have that and I didn't have that intimacy of somebody understanding me that deeply, I realized that I was left on my own and then started to understand. Well, not in the beginning. I mean, like the first year, like I said, I was passive suicidal and the voices inside my head, I never realized that I always thought I was a positive person, but then I realized how negative I was toward myself. Right? And so that's the polar extreme. Be really, really positive for everybody else, but beat yourself up you know, to the core. And I work with so many people and even in my generation and younger generations. I mean, I think that there's a pandemic in the country. Yes, but there's one also called anxiety. And the anxiety levels in people and in our youth is, it's become unmanageable for so many people. And I think a lot of it has to do with that inner self-talk, that inner dialogue, that building that frequency in the body of not being enough, not being smart enough, not being good enough, not being enough. And then continually looking in the mirror and saying, oh, I don't like this. I don't like that. Instead of engaging in what is working. So, most people, because we have the tendency to be negative, right? The brain is 85% wired for negativity. We have the tendency to focus on what isn't working. And why we do that is because when we're in the what isn't working, we feel a lot of pain. We feel the emotion. We feel the trauma. We feel, right? And that's a vibration. So feelings are vibrations. So a vibration, we don't go around saying, how are you vibrating today? How are you feeling today? Right. And it's just a conscious choice to, describe vibration when we use the word feeling. And so when when we feel a
Yeah.
high emotional negative response, it gets our attention. So we're not allowing ourselves to walk around in ecstasy and, joy and happiness. And, we're the label is you're a flower child or, you know, but really to embrace joy and happiness is what we're striving for. What most people say they want. It's not the thing they want. It's not the house they want. It's not the car they want. It's the feeling that it's going to give them. But because we're so tied to defending our misery, it because we feel that, and again, when I say we, it's a generality, right? It's the idea that we can't change our lives or that we can't do anything about it. So we accept and we just day in, day out, keep repeating the pattern. And as I like to say, our personality is our personal reality, which is based on all of our habits and our behaviors and our thinking patterns. So when you really dive into what is working, that's when you can start to love yourself and start to see that. I mean, I now think about I hug the walls of my house because I'm just so in awe of the people who built it. I'm so in awe of what it took for the lumber to get to, North Hollywood. I'm so in awe of the truck drivers who get, you know, the merchandise to places and to stores. I'm in awe of nature and what it takes for the systems and the ecosystem. I'm in awe that there's blood running through my veins and that I have awareness of it. I'm in awe, of what it takes for the mechanism and for even this. I think back to that sandbox and building those cities. I just never had the awareness that I have now of what it takes to put a pipe in a house and for plumbing to work and for electricity. There's just so much that it takes in order for all the pieces to fit together. And yet there's just a whole lot of misery. And I think it starts with wake up to what is working, what is available, and it starts again, that self love piece. Parents, even with parenting, are teaching their children through high emotional states. They didn't read their book. They didn't do their homework. They didn't do their chores. They did. And those high emotional states, create within low self-esteem, low self-confidence. I'm not enough. It's not good enough. We don't have parenting or and there are parents who do this, saying, "You read your book. I love you so much. Oh my God." If we had more of those emotional responses, we would build more in that frequency, of things are wonderful. Things are working. And that when you have contrast, when you have the lower frequency, when you have the pain, it's just trying to get your attention to say, you need to focus differently. You need to focus in the opposite direction.
There's two things there. I mean, this this is like a therapy session for me. You talked about 85% of the brain's wired for was it negative voices and negativity?
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone has the way you describe that, the way parents speak to their kids, and that gets you sort of this inner voice of negativity. Oh, I must do this, or I should have done that, and that's all that those sort of words. At the same time, there's an element of we're all desiring. We all have a desire to be something that we're currently not. We're all on a journey of transition to some degree. So, as a transformative success coach, how do you get people to quell that negative voice, and how do you help them identify the change that needs to happen in them to be able to fail faster and fail more willingly without fear, and see it as a path to the success, to unlock the real person that they are? But I also do want to ask you as well, if you had gone through and the recognition that you went through after the tragedy earlier in your life, and you had identified your true self, and the you're able to love yourself the way you do now, and all the things that you know now, would you have lived a different life earlier? Maybe we can come on to that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me just address your first question in the way that I work with people. There are two ways that we change. And one is through a traumatic event, which is what happened to me. I had no choice, right? Everything capsized. It can also be an ecstatic event, a wedding, you're married,
A
whatever,
divorce.
right? A divorce. That might be an ecstatic event or not. And, and, or if it's an accident or like, Twin Towers. But there are also ecstatic events that can help you change your life dramatically as well. And then the other way is through constant space repetition of a new idea, so that you plant a new desire and you build it through images and you build it through emotion and you build it through repetition, 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 repetition until subconscious mind starts to own it and accept it as the new truth. So the way that I like to work with people is we start out with going after the dream that's buried inside. And a way that we do that to discover that is just to have an honest conversation about fantasy. You fantasize and what is it that you really, really, really want? And to allow yourself to take some time and write down all your wants in life, and write down all your desires and write down all your fantasies. And then to really look at which one do you really, really want and which one scares the pants off of you. So, if you say you want to write a book, it it has maybe some desire to it, but why are you not doing it? An example. So what we go after is this stretch goal that you don't know how to do. And it's really important that you don't know how to do it. Because as soon as you've got it figured out, the intellect, the logical mind takes over, and your prefrontal cortex starts to kick in to all the reasons why not, instead of, the gut response and the gut desire. So for example, I worked with a financial planner in his 50s, miserable at work, miserable, and discovered that what he really wanted his whole life was to be in a band. So at 55, somebody's going to say it's too late. But it's like, if there's music in your body and the music needs to be expressed, now let's find a way to express it. And so through a series of challenges and setting some goal lines, let's start with a song that you're going to rehearse, because let's say this person was a guitar player, going to rehearse this song to play at your niece's wedding. So you've got 3 months to do that. And how does that feel? That feels exciting. How else does that feel? It scares the pants off of me. Okay. Those are the two ingredients. Are you willing to do it and are you able? Yes. Okay. So let's aim for that. And then as soon as you start aiming for that outside the comfort zone and really being honest with the desire, that's when the magic starts to happen. And that's when the universe starts to conspire to bring to you the unimaginable. So, like with your impossible network, it's not impossible, it's I'm possible, right? And so, what happened, like with this man, for example, week two out after making a decision, he's out walking his dog in a park, and somebody comes up to him in the park and says, "Hey, would you like to come and jam with us tonight at the local bar?" And he's like, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, you look like a musician." He said, "What are you talking about?" And then he said, "Yeah, I play guitar." He didn't even know that the guy played guitar. So then that guy ended up on stage jamming, feeling really good. 3 weeks later, he's got a second gig. 4 weeks later, he's got a paid gig. 5 weeks later, he's putting together a band. 6 weeks later, he wants to have a number one hit. Why not? Right? Now, it's not the attainment of the desire as much as who are you becoming as you move toward it. And as that started to happen for him, his workplace started to change. He started to love his work again. His boss was listening to him differently. He was having more time. He was having more fun with his family. All kinds of things start to change based on where you're focused. But if you keep focused on, again, the misery and I can't do it, you're not going to create the more.
Mm. Do you think, I mean, goal setting, I mean, we've just passed, wow, we're in February already, time stamping this. We've just passed that time of year when everyone has their resolutions and they set their new goals for the year and all that sort of thing. And we know so much is written about it. And, whether you're in a company or you're an individual, an entrepreneur or a freelancer, you read a lot about SMART goals, about realistic, achievable. But it sounds to me, and I've always believed this from my early days when I was a runner, you've got to set big, hairy, audacious goals, things that are just beyond what you can
Yes.
imagine as being possible just now. And going back to the impossible network, is about people that believe what is impossible is possible. And it just takes time,
Yeah.
attention, detail, and imagination and whatever. But the way you're describing this, is that core to when you're actually sitting with your clients, do you have to keep pushing them to the point to get to that nugget, that which might be buried deep inside them? There's something because some people will probably, obviously, on the surface level, come out with a goal and say what's their dream, but it's maybe not that audacious. It's maybe not that big. How do you know when you've got them to the point and they've really defined something that is truly um, dreamlike, I suppose?
I think that people don't have such a problem identifying the dream as much as why they're not doing the dream. And I I definitely agree, like I always say smart goals are not that smart, you know? That yes, go for the big, hairy, audacious goal and then use smart goals to get you there, right? Because the smart goals are just what I call milestones, right? And that you want to be able to say, well, I'm aiming in this direction. So it's kind of like a torpedo that aims for its target and nothing's going to get in its way. And if there's the current that pulls it off, but it gets back on track, right? It's a psycho-cybernetic system that we all have. And, or even if there's a coral reef in its way, it's going to go through it. It's going to find a hole. It's going to go over it. It's just going to find a way to get there, right? So it's really about, if you're so focused on the big, hairy, audacious goal, the conscious mind goes into overwhelm. And remember, the focus of the conscious mind is focus and choose. So it's to have the awareness of this is the aim, but then to break it down into what I call a 3-foot toss. So if you're going to play horseshoes, right, for the first time, and your goal is 20, the aim is 20 feet away, what are the chances you're going to hit the post your first time out? Not likely. So pull that post 3 feet in front of you, and that's an aim, right? And then you're more likely to hit it. And when you hit that, you feel confident, you feel more success. And then you keep repeating it until you get bored. And then you're in that conscious competence phase. And then you become unconsciously competent. You could hit that post with your eyes closed. And then you decide that you gotta push out now. You gotta push out again. And so it's to hit those milestones or to design those milestones and to have a sense of designing your life, right? That you're aiming in a direction and you break it down so that you do design it and that you're hitting your targets or you're finding a way, you know, what usually happens is that things start to come to you and it's whether or not you're going to say yes. Because some of those things that come to you are what I call the unimaginable. So when I ask people what their dream is, a lot of people will say, I want to write a book, but that's not a hairy, audacious goal. So it's like one woman who was a 72-year-old coach, she wanted to write a book and she had been writing for 25 years. And I just said, that's not a hairy, audacious goal. It's not a stretch goal because you know how to write, but you're not doing it. So let's design it. Then in 3 months' time, you're going to invite 20 of your closest friends to your living room to hear you read your first draft. And she gulped and she panicked, and then I said, how does that sound? She says, I'm in. Okay, that's great. And then I said, but it's still not defined yet until you send out the invitations. So when are you sending out the invitations? It was a Wednesday. She sent out the invitations on the Monday and, you know, took a big deep breath. And then she got herself in her chair every day writing for 2 to 3 hours a day, which she wasn't doing before, but she kept saying she wanted to write a book. And I was in her living room 3 months later where she read the first draft of her book. Same with, wanting to lose weight. I want to lose weight. I want to lose weight. I want to lose weight. What I do is I just probe a little bit. And she said she wanted to lose weight. I was like, you know how to lose weight. You know how to hire a trainer. You know how to walk. You know how to run. You know how to eat well. So let's find out what's going to motivate you. And I just probed a little bit and found out that she really admired an 86-year-old bodybuilder, Ernestine Shepherd's, I believe her name is. I said, how about signing up for a bodybuilding competition? Now she's 72 years old. And she said, all right, let's do it. So she signed, and I said, but it's still not that hairy, audacious goal until you find the competition, you know the date, and you pay for it. When she signed up, when she paid for it, when she bought her pink fuchsia bikini and her tanning spray, she was at the gym at 5 o'clock every morning and she could hold a plank longer than her trainer. Now, again, it's not about, and she ended up not doing the competition because she got sick with a flu before the competition and couldn't compete. But did she lose the weight? Yes. Did she build body strength? Yes. It's about who you're becoming. It's not necessarily the acquisition, but it's being pulled up so that you use something that excites you and you commit to. But then that's also where, Mark, accountability is so important. Somebody holding you accountable. And I've got people holding me accountable, but if they're a friend, I don't do it. If I pay somebody, I do it. You know, it's as if somebody is really going to hold me accountable. I've got to get my skin in the game. And you've got to understand. And look there are people who don't want to be entrepreneurs. There are people who want their 9 to 5 jobs. There are people who are happy in the comfort zone and they'll be okay with mediocrity. There's nothing wrong with that if you're happy.
I spend a lot of time with technology and it feels to me that essentially what you're doing is you're reprogramming people's brains or you're reprogramming their lives and you're using a design thinking methodology to
Yes.
create change. And I'm going to go back and you use that word and it's in your book, True Love, True Self, that we're all vibrant, vibrational beings. And I suppose I'm asking these questions because I'm trying to get in my own head. There's a bit of code here as to how to affect change. And, I'm doing this podcast because it's an experiment in change in my own life in a way. And all the people that I'm connecting with is that there seems to be a bit of a formula here and a bit of code that can be applied that's universal. That if you can identify those dreams, those goals, and you can unlock the inside to someone the belief that it is possible to achieve that, even if it's a big, hairy, audacious goal, the vibrational being that you are, it changes from being negative to more positive. And that you said that 85%, I suspect that when you start to see that change being implemented by these clients, whether it be the musician, the guy that wanted to be a musician, the woman, the bodybuilder, their vibrations are more positive rather than negative, and therefore they feel better in themselves, and therefore they probably are attracting the type of people and the situations and the scenarios that take them closer to, as you say, these encounters that occur that would otherwise have been unimaginable.
Mhm.
And if that is a sort of part of that code, so if people are, if people are listening to this and they want to make that change, do people have to find a coach to be able to take that step? If people desire a change like you did, because I know you had Bob Proctor, who's an amazing, sort of sadly passed now, one of the great coaches that's ever lived. You had him as your coach or mentor. Um, do people have to seek out a coach to make these life transformative changes in their lives?
No, they don't have to do that at all, but it helps. You know, it's really, there are people who are seekers who read a lot of books, right? But then there are people like I work with PhDs who don't have jobs because they're not in application. They've got all the material at the conscious level, right? And it's storage, but they're not applying it into the body. So there's like three parts of our personality. So there's the intellectual, there's the spiritual, and there's the physical. And a lot of people will either focus on like the physical. I'm going to, become healthy and fit and strong. And then they become, obsessed with that part of their lives. Or there are people who are so focused on spiritual that they're not making a lot of money, because all their emphasis is, on just connecting on a spiritual level. And then there's people who are, like I said, with PhDs, or people stuck in the conscious mind or just in the intellectual mind and not integrating the other parts. So the holistic viewpoint really is to combine the spiritual, the intellectual, and the physical, and that there are three ways that we really feed ourselves. And one is through our thoughts and our thinking. The other one is through our environment and who we're hanging out with and what we breathe. And the other one is what we eat, the foods we put into our body. And so all of that is going to create, what shows up in our physical state, emotional state, and our mental state. And understand that they have to work together. All three work together. And then as far as raising our own consciousness, there are people who can do it with their friend based on the friends they hang out with. But I work with so many people who are hanging out with a lot of so-called negative Nellies and David Downer. So what I recommend is start hanging out with people who are going to raise your consciousness, because a lot of what's going on is people are trying to change their lives with the mind they already have. You cannot change your life with the mind you already have. Your mind is a programmed state. The higher part of us is the imagination, is that part of us that taps into something greater than ourselves. So when we have like the conversation you and I are having, or, that's the opportunity for you to change my thinking or for you to impact my thinking or vice versa, or we go and listen to somebody who really triggers something in us, or inspires something in us, or we go to an event or we go on a vacation and we see a different culture. It's all about increasing awareness. And the more awareness that we have, right, and again, it's not all about money and success. It's what is success. I mean, I work with people who are millionaires, multimillionaires, who don't feel successful. And why is that? They've not acknowledged themselves along the way because they just keep chasing the pot at the end of the rainbow. And if you just keep chasing that pot without pausing, to feel your success, to acknowledge yourself and your worth, to own, these feelings of happiness. These are all vibrational states and vibrational frequencies. And that when you're in a higher state of positivity, it's what you focus on expand. The more good you look for, the more good you will see. The people, I was working with a therapist. I work with a lot of therapists. And I said to her, I want you to examine your environment and all the negative Nellies and David Downers in your environment and report to me, who they are and who you're hanging out with. And she said, Barbara, my daughter's very positive. My brother's very positive. My friends are very positive. She says, I'm the negative Nelly. And it's like, okay, so now we've got exercises, we've got tools, we've got processes, we've got all of these ways to start shifting the focus and shift the frequency and shift, where again, you're not owning somebody else's feelings. You're really 100% responsible for the choices that you're making, but it takes awareness to do that. And some of these, like the processes, you're not going to get processes from your parents and your friends, and you're not going to get exercises we've been taught in school to be pulled up because we've got exams, right? Or we've got teachers. And so we're in this whole programming, but we're in a comparative programming most of our lives. Get measured next to, get measured next to, get measured next to. And then, we're in college and then we go to work. And when we're at work, we have measurements as well, and so we're always being maybe pulled up by those people or our leaders, or we, go in the opposite direction and are miserable. Or, if we are an entrepreneur, as an entrepreneur, how is it that you have your teachers measuring you or your boss or your leaders? You've got yourself. How do you motivate yourself? And unless you know what your drivers are, unless you know what really motivates you, it's a challenge.
You studied neuroscience, of which I think is fascinating. That you're someone that does what you do, and you've got this now knowledge of neuroscience and how the brain works that you apply in your practice to help people focus on what you call their future memory, which is an unusual term to get your head around, and not focus on the self-limiting past memories or self-limiting beliefs. Um, I'd love you just to talk about the importance of neuroscience, because I was talking to a couple of people yesterday about the importance of the default mode network. And the reason I was talking about it is that we have to get to a point where we can sit and daydream and use our imaginations, and I'll open our minds to whatever comes to us from the universe rather than being distracted by screens and phones and all the streams that feed us daily through all the digital devices we're connected to. So that's a slight distraction, but so I'd love you to just explain this future memory and how you go about helping people using neuroscience to help them create these future memories and to flip the script in their lives.
Yeah, the thing with neuroscience, and it's just fascinating what we're discovering. It's just really wonderful. We've got neural pathways, and these neural pathways are locked into grooves. And so if we keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, that groove just gets deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and more committed to what it already knows. And so to change, and to create new neural pathways and new networks, it does involve, your imagination, and it does involve daydreaming, and it does involve deeply listening and not just having a limited viewpoint. But when the subconscious mind interprets language into pictures, and pictures create emotion. So that's why we're very visual beings, right? So that's why media uses imagery to sell. And we don't buy from our thinking mind. There is a percentage that does buy from their thinking mind, but it's about 15%. The other 85% are buying from their emotional mind. So we're always, responding or reacting, from our emotional place, which is what is called our program, what we already know. And so to break up with that is really designing, again, a new idea, a new thought, or taking even a visual, an image, and go into a future memory. So most people are spending 97% of their day just rewiring past memories over and over and over, pictures of, things they did in the past. More often than not, it's great when you're focusing on, images of success or times that you felt happy or you felt joy or, the good times. But most people are focused on their mistakes, their regrets, what they didn't do right. Knowing what I know now, like in your previous question, would my life have been different? Had I had mentors teaching me what it took to be an actor in this world, a storyteller in this world, I would have been a phenomenal performer and storyteller. Right. But I didn't have the coaching or the direction or the mentorship or the people that guided me in how to work with my emotional states. I didn't have that, you know, um, support system, let's say. And I think the support system is very, very important. So in neuroscience, and they've shown there's a study at UC San Diego where they hooked up a lot of people to electrodes and asked them to think creative thoughts and then also asked them to think negative thoughts. And they showed in the scan images that the positive thinking created new synapses and new neural networks. The negative thoughts actually exploded the neural synapses. So there was like explosion of, neural dynamics going on. So it's really about growing the brain, growing the networks, having a growth mindset and evolving it through frequencies that are more positive, healthy, regenerative. We're not going to regenerate our health if we don't believe we're going to be well. We're not going to do the work it takes to get better. We're not going to, it's all in, again, the support systems. And they're just showing like a future memory is take a picture of something you want to have in your life, whether it's a trip to Bora Bora or whether you want, to bring your family on a vacation or whether or not you want to go to Disney World, whatever it is, and you take that future memory and dream about that every day instead of dreaming about what isn't working and the past that no longer is serving you. So that's where, because subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between past, present, or future. It only knows now. So in the now, and then we could talk about all this goal setting and, bringing success principles and spiritual principles and universal laws together. But ultimately, I believe it's really about how do you engage in the present moment to its fullest?
Do you think is that why affirmations are important?
Absolutely, because you know what? We're affirming all day long. If we're speaking a negative thought, it's an affirmation. When we say, I can't do that, that's an affirmation. Or I think somebody, I can't remember who it is, calls it non-formation or something like that. But it's really that where affirmations don't work if you are just by rote. Just like reading a book once is not going to change your life. It's through the repetition of the idea over and over. I'm reading books, 20, 25 times and I'm still going like, whoa, I didn't get that, the last time I read it. Oh, whoa, I didn't get that. But because I'm at a different level of awareness every time I come to it. And affirmations really need the emotional feeling state to get it into the emotional mind, the subconscious mind. And through the repetition of that, that's when you start to, I call it acting as if. You start to, you have to pretend.
It's funny. You talked about the intellectual, spiritual, and physical, and it is the same. Why do I go to the gym every day? Because I just know if I only do it a couple of times a week, it doesn't have the same impact of the repetition of going every day, of doing
Right.
the boring leg lifts or whatever the exercises I'm doing to work on a particular part of my body. It does take repetition, and the mind and the spirit, and I suppose in the brain, it's the same thing. It is it is interesting. You mentioned cybernetics, and I remember someone giving me a book years ago called, was it Maxwell? Someone? Yeah, yeah.
Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell
And a lot
Maltz.
of people
Yep,
back then thought it was all woo woo, all this nonsense. But really, what you're doing, you've created a bridge between what people used to say is woo woo and all this sort of, oh yeah, goal setting, power positive thinking, all that sort of thing. Yeah. Napoleon Hill,
yep,
Tony, what's his name?
Robin,
Robbins and all that. But it's actually, it's not, it isn't, you can't say woo woo now because it's neuroscience. It's understanding how the brain works and the difference between the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, and taking control of thoughts. It's funny.
that's right.
Yesterday, I had someone call me telling me about an interview they'd done and saying, oh, they asked me all these questions that were not what I'd expected. And I'm not very good at thinking on my feet. I thought, well, if you say that, you're never going to be able to think on your feet because as you said, that's an affirmation
That's right.
of a negative thought that's just,
That's
it's
right.
creating a scripted behavior that will only repeat itself. So you have to break that scripted behavior and change it.
That's
And
right.
and
That's
so
right.
you're giving people almost this, going back to my analogy to design thinking, you're giving them a design system for redesigning their lives.
That's right. Yeah, I'm a brain geek too, it's like I like to break things down, and I could not, even like with this woo-woo concept, have faith in any of it unless I understood the science of it. Is what led me to break down, quantum physics and nano and quarks, and to understand vibration and frequency, because everything is vibration, everything is energy, everything is. See, we're so stuck on a Newtonian physics paradigm, and Newtonian physics is really all about you change things through pills or mechanisms, right? But what Newtonian physics doesn't take into consideration is the invisible side of success. And the invisible side is energy.
Go back to your vibrations.
Yeah. And if you look even in our modern medicine, it's really lacking. It's about 17 years behind what's really taking place, in awareness around health and around energy. And, I was talking to somebody the other day who was diagnosed with cancer, and they saw an oncologist, an oncologist nutritionist. And the nutritional advice that they got from the oncologist was unbelievable to me, like unbelievably poor. And because they didn't have the education or the awareness around nutrition, yet they're saying to this person that go ahead, eat sugar, it's okay. But I know different, you know, I just know different resources that's just not being shared.
I mean, again, to go back to something you said that resonated, the thoughts, the environment, and the things we eat, the environments we spend our time in, the people we spend our time with, and the thoughts that we actually manufacture. So we can take control by creating daily habits of positive affirmations, starting to control the thoughts that we have. We can set and identify those people of good energy versus bad energy, or some other boss that used to have called drains versus radiators. So spend your time with radiators and not drains, and put yourself in healthy environments and eat well. When you put all those things together, I suppose those would be the foundational elements of actually starting to live a more intentional life and to help you. Would you say that is helping you achieve pathway to creating what you called in your book, the true love, true self, on putting yourself on a journey to self-love? If you take control of those three things, thoughts, environments, and your eating behaviors, are those the foundational elements?
Yes, I would say those are the foundational elements, along with listening, right? So that after the loss of my husband, I would say that I've been mostly guided by signs, messages, not stressing to putting a round peg into a square hole, that control piece that I was navigating through the earlier part of my life, and not being as hard on myself, so that if things aren't going as I think they should be going, that I allow myself to redirect or distract or I always say, shift your energy, shift your energy, shift your energy, or to soften that if something feels painful, to know and have awareness that that's a good thing. So I tell my clients all the time, they start to aim in the direction of their dream and amazing magical things start to show up. And then the paradigms start to rush in, which means everything that can stop them from having their dream is going to show up. It's kind of crazy when you see it. It's like I have this program that's 12 weeks long, and about week 4, week 5, I'm very busy because people are going, what's going on? Things are out of control. And I say to people, cry through your tears and say, oh, goody, 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 change is happening. Change is happening. So even for myself, when I'm in that state of contrast, I know that the contrast is to say, you need to focus on a different direction, or you need to navigate, and be kinder to yourself. And then when I'm in a more self-loving place, that's where the creativity can come in.
You quoted Bob Proctor, and he said something about most people go through life tiptoeing through life to death without ever discovering safe. Yeah,
Safely, safely tiptoe
yeah.
to death
So
with their
is it
dreams
the
buried
case? Because I
inside.
can see, I know plenty of people, and I spent years in advertising tiptoeing towards death, sometimes almost self-inflicted through the dangerous situations I get myself in, but not really thinking about anything, just day by day, Groundhog Day. And that's what it felt like.
Yeah,
But now that I've got a clear goal, ambition with what I'm doing with this podcast, it's almost like, all right, there's no going back, because now I'm aware. It's like the curtains have been pulled
right,
back, and it's every day. You need to
right.
be. It's a
That's
practice.
right.
So going back to the analogy of the gym or
That's right.
the code's been set. So
Yeah.
is it something that when you speak with your clients
Yes.
that you set them on a path and that's them? How do you keep ensure that they don't drift back into tiptoeing?
Well, I never expected this, but when I first started doing the program, it's called Thinking into Results. And when I first started doing it, I thought people would do the program and then they'd go off on their own. And they started calling me 3 months after the program saying, I want to do the program again. Now, I have clients I've never expected that have repeated the same program with me for 10 years. And it's not that the program has changed, it's that they have changed. So every time they come back and they repeat the program, I hear everybody say this, I don't remember this, Barbara. I don't remember this. And it's like, well, you don't remember it because you're a new version of you. And your awareness level is at a different level. And they just kept coming back and coming back. And so when's the next group? When's the next time? Because I've got a new goal. I've got the next level, the next level, the next level. So yes, it's a never ending journey. Once you become aware, it's just like with exercise. It's the same thing. It's just like with the foods you eat. It's the same thing that otherwise you're going to go on autopilot. Lack of awareness is autopilot, where the brain just, it's that groundhog day. It's just going to go right back to what it knows, what it knows, what it knows, what it knows. Going to be in the safety zone. And then one day, I like to say to people, if you're on your deathbed, what's the one thing you'll regret not doing? And most people are not even thinking about that because they're just getting there and getting there and getting there and getting there. And then one day they're on their deathbed and they're saying, I wish I had climbed more mountains. I wish I had, walked more beaches. I wish I had, and that's because they've been on autopilot. And, unfortunately for me, or fortunately, the ground was shaken, underneath my feet with all the losses that I had, but it propelled me into awareness. And that awareness is, yes, you have to, again, back to your gym analogy, you have to keep up the process. I just said to myself today, I'm going to eat smaller lunches or maybe not eat so much at lunch because I'm tired after lunch. Or I'm going to have less carbs because I'm really feeling a big drop in my energy. So that consciousness and that awareness, now it's up to me to do something about it. Otherwise, autopilot's going to take over and I'll go right back to the lunch that I had, the day before and the one that I had last week on that same day. My Monday I eat this, my Tuesday I eat this, my Wednesday I eat this. And then want to take a nap because I'm not being conscious.
I wanted to ask you about your natural gifts. And you mentioned earlier about, I think you said perception, intuition, and feedback. And clearly those were natural gifts that were being applied when you were directing. Um,
Yes.
do you think those are the same natural gifts that are manifesting now and helping you be such a successful coach with people and being, I mean, I interview people called storytellers, difference makers, domain experts. You happen to be all three because you're a great storyteller. You're clearly making a difference in people's lives and you're a domain expert in this area. So are those your natural gifts, the ones you mentioned earlier, and are they manifesting themselves in the same way now in the role that you're playing in life?
Yeah, I would say that I have an uncanny eye for the bizarre. And that is, I see things that a lot of people don't see. I think a lot of that had to do with my directing over the years and my training to look for, the subtle details. But I can pick out really bizarre things in people. I can see very bizarre things, and I have attention to detail. My sister has that gift as well, and we just see things that it just runs by everybody. So I love using that part of me, and I love using that feedback because I really feel a lot, and to be able to interpret my feelings as feedback for people. And I always check in: does this feel accurate or not?
How do you continue to manage, which must exist at some point? The negative voice doesn't go away. How do you manage the fragility, doubt, and the negative voice?
You're absolutely right. It never goes away, but again, it's the opportunity to shift perspective, and it's in the law of opposites, right? The law of polarity, right? For every up, there's a down. For every in, there's an out. For every happy, there's a sad. So I have a different appreciation for if I feel sadness. I don't have it control my entire day, um, because I understand it's necessary and that it's ebb and flow. It's the tides. It's it's kind of like if you're seeking and you go out on a boat and you're going to hit land and your destination, or you're aiming for the land, but there's going to be some rocky waters, and there's going to be, no wind. And there's going to be days where the sun is just glorious, right? And everything is just moving and sailing perfectly. And then there's other days that it's really to find the resources inside of you to navigate. So I've got now all these tools that I didn't have when I lost my husband and was very depressed. I have a toolbox. I have exercises. I have perspective. I have understanding. I have awareness. That's taken a lot of years of growing and aiming and focusing on growing. And it's not without, sometimes I go, do I want to do this anymore? It's not without days that I say, I just don't feel like it today.
You mentioned the medical profession being 17 years behind. I hate to think where the education system is compared to the knowledge we have today. I interviewed another guest a while ago, and I'm going to have her on again, Julia Black, who's a leader in innovation and education system reform in the UK. And she's got a program called Lights On, where she turns the lights on children's minds by getting into what she calls identifying their heart
Love that.
self, their minds, to unlock their mind self, to unlock their soul self. And by doing that, really you're getting to the heart of that individual's, as you said at the start about food, everyone's different, no one's the same. And that's what she unlocks through people, mainly helped by working with mothers to do it. Do you think that if you're, that what you do, you must reflect on education, think there needs to be some sort of wholesale reimagine of our education system and how we nurture children? Because if you started to do what you do at scale with children at a young age, the impact it could have, the exponential impact on society in a world where everyone's running almost like headless chickens around the threat of AI and Chat GPT, and Google just launched their Bard program, which is their version of it. Surely what you're doing needs to be something that's embraced by policymakers, to start to take action in schools to help children, because that's where we're going to address the big problems we have in life. Because this isn't just I don't think about unlocking individual streams. We need problem solvers in life. We need action takers, people that can actually address the big gnarly problems that we're facing.
Mm-hmm.
And those problems become people's big, hairy, audacious
Mm-hmm.
goals and ambitions. So I don't know, how do we go about getting the narrative that you're and the tools that you use not being embraced just by individuals, but by systems?
Well, I think that's a great question, and I love, what this woman is doing. You said light up,
Lights on.
lights on. I think that's just
Yeah, I maybe need to connect you with her, because what I'm part of doing with this podcast is looking at how can I create
yeah,
connections
yeah,
where they wouldn't otherwise exist. Because I think your two minds
yeah,
together and knowledge could create impact.
absolutely. Um, and I was just reflecting on this today. The educational system is complex, and I mean, there are schools out there like Montessori schools, Walden, different approaches, Crossroads, and the emphasis is a lot more on the creative mind. Unfortunately, the first thing to go in most of our school systems is the arts, right? Drama, creative writing, all of that. And it's so important that we continue, because these are ways, to develop the individual. It's not about making somebody an artist or making somebody actor or, a musician. Um, Math is also very creative. It's the stimulation and, in recognizing creativity. I know I was in San Francisco teaching 25 drama classes a week. I would go into a school system, I would spend 10 weeks, and I would have the entire class write their own play. So everybody had a character that they designed themselves. And within 10 weeks, we performed with costume and sets and all these little individual characters that the individual, added to the fabric of the story. There was one of me, I was a California Arts Council artist in residence. There was just one of me doing this. And there were other people also, making this effort that I probably didn't know of, but it's going to take a village. It's not, it's really going to take a village of people understanding the importance. And I love that she's starting with the parents and the parent understanding, because there are parents who are homeschooling and because they want their child not to be a victim of the school system. But even those parents who are homeschooling are stressed and trying to navigate all the pressures, and all the expectations. And I was just looking at a young kid the other day with this big backpack of books that was hanging down to, you know, below her, coccyx. And the guy was going like, "Oh my gosh, how is that child even carrying all of those books?" Right? And the expectations are intense, and the allowance of expression, it's really something that needs to be tackled. Do I have the answer? No. It's got to start. Like, if I could bring my program into the schools, a lot of parents who take my program want to hire me to work with their kids to take the program. But it's not just goal setting.
No, I think it is. It's you're taking the neuroscience, the knowledge you have of neuroscience, and using tools and design thinking to help people become essentially their true selves.
Absolutely. And I think that there really needs to be, how do you teach compassion? You know, and but compassion toward oneself is where it begins, I believe.
Well, if you don't have that, and as you say, getting that true love, you're going to end up with a voice which is continually beating yourself up and being negative,
Yes. Yes.
reinforcing. It's going back to what you said about the parents' script. So it isn't. Why Julia's right. It is. If you don't actually start to put in the mind of parents, the importance of what they say and their words and the
That's
thoughts, the feelings they're
that's
creating,
right.
then, that so it can't be done in isolation.
No, it
So,
it's
okay. Well,
programming, right?
absolutely. So if you're open to it, I will make the
Yeah,
connection to
that'd
you
be
and Julia,
great.
because I think, and I would love to be part of that conversation when we get you on a Zoom call together. Um, so part of this, these serendipitous connections I'm trying to create are what I'm calling engineering random collisions. They're not really random because we're actually planning them and starting to match and go, well, if we got together Julia and Barbara together and UK and the US, and wow, what could we actually concoct? Um, you know, that's what I want to do, to try and accelerate some form of impact and change, positive change in the world. But I was reading something the other day about what's called reciprocity rings from an island in the South Pacific. So essentially, I thought, oh, that's really interesting. That's really what I'm trying to do, is create reciprocity rings. So in the spirit of reciprocity, what is your ask to the network, the Impossible Network, to other guests, if there's something you would like to ask that you would want support with, help with, or anything? And we'll put it out there.
That's a great question. Yeah, it's I, I'm off on this thought about what's become really important to me is to stay out of judgment. When we judge, and this goes back to the compassion piece, when we judge, we're really judging ourselves, right? You spot it, you got it. So if you're pointing in the direction, where are these three fingers pointing, right? If you, s- if you spot it, you got it. And for me, I've really worked a lot in my life and with my clients on um, to feel freedom within yourself. One of the biggest ways to achieve it is to stop judgment, and it starts with when you judge others, that's pointing you in the direction of where you're judging yourself. When you can identify that, that's going to open up a pathway to releasing, that perfectionism that we started talking about at the beginning. One of my biggest challenges in life has always been asking for help from others. Right? It's like I've been so good at giving help, and then in my losses, that's where I learned to receive help. I didn't ask for it. I had to learn to receive it. And I do say to people, and one of the processes that I ask people is ask for what you want. Practice asking. You might not get it, but practice asking because that's where the magic is, right? So, in terms of like your guests and what my ask would be is to, feel free to reach out and connect and to align if it feels in alignment, with growing the impact and growing the message and having a conversation.
Yeah, well, I'm sure people will. Yeah, our previous guest, and we should make the connection. There was a thank you to Jennifer Hutchins for recommending that we interview you next. And she's obviously, and I just put in the newsletter yesterday a piece about her, which is her advice, which is give first before you ask. And she definitely is a shining example of that.
Yeah. She
Um, so, yeah, in the spirit of her recommending you, our final question to you is, who should we interview next?
Well, I have a partner named Dr. UCLA. It's a fascinating man, and he is a cardiologist. And he and I have been studying neuroplasticity together. And we have a program called Your Genius Code Unlocked, where we take a life script and he adds brainwave entrainment. And so, brainwave entrainment is when we induce brain states so that we can reach not just the subconscious mind, but the unconscious mind as well. So, we're going into ancestral programming and helping to release blocks in order to, it's not about the achievement of the goal, it's really about to have the achievement of joy.
Hmm. Wow, that sounds fascinating. Definitely. Well, when this goes live, we'll ask you to make the connection to Dr. UC
Abbott Kynan.
Kynan. Okay. Well, we'll look forward to that. And we'll put in your links to your program and your site in the show notes, and any social media links you want us to link to.
You.
But also, I would say to anyone, um, it would be having not spent a huge amount of time, but I went through the book on Kindle and took some great so well, what I call it saying is it's called True Love, True Self. You call it the journey to self-love, but when having read it and downloaded it, it really is a guidebook, and it's full of wisdom and great tools for, as I said, the piece on breaking down affirmations. And I've always struggled with how to write good affirmations, and now I know exactly how to do that. So I'd recommend that anyone get a copy of that on Kindle and download it. It's very good.
Thank you.
And just thank you, Barbara, for your time and your amazing insight and wisdom and sharing your experiences and being so transparent and honest with us. It's been fantastic, and I really appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Mark. Well, thank you for all your wonderful questions.
Well, thank you, and we'll follow up soon. Okay, that's all for now, folks. Now here's my ask of you. Please follow this podcast on Apple or Spotify or whatever player you use. Also, please subscribe to our new Random Collisions newsletter. We really are working to build a global community of action takers, action engines of people that really care about the problems that need solving. Thank you very much, and see you next time.